Welcome to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. We are really glad you found us. In this podcast, me, Simon, a funeral director,
and me, Tina, I'm an independent celebrant.
We're going to discuss all things funeral in an informal space to demystify what happens when we say goodbye.
Based on your questions and queries, Si and myself are two industry professionals that are going to chat through the hows, whats and wherefores. We actively work in the funeral industry in Devon in the UK. So, we hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. This is Tina, and I have a guest with me today, Isabel, who in a moment will introduce herself. And we may also be joined by Simon. So, Isabel, hello. It's lovely to have you on. Do you want to say a little bit about what you do and what we might be talking about today?
Sure. Hello, Tina. Really nice to be on this podcast. What am I? I have been involved, I guess, in ceremony and death work, and actually coming to call it death literacy, I guess. I do think that's a really good kind of coverall term for it. For the last, goodness me, I don't know, probably nearly 20 years now. And having gone on a journey of starting off as a celebrant and then becoming head of ceremonies at Humanist UK, which I was for 7 years, and been executive director of the Good Funeral Guide for the last 8 years, I think. And my passion and my energy is with that, but it's also with my new project, which is called Liminal Time, which has been described as a masterclass in death literacy, which is lovely, and it's quite unique. It's a day-long workshop which is designed to help people rehearse, because I was an actress for 20 years, so that's where that comes from. The period of time from just before a death occurs to just after the ceremony has taken place. And I, along with Fran from the Good Funeral Guide, originally designed a 13-step concept to support people through that period of time. And each step is basically a portal into a deeper conversation around death, care of the body choices, how to design meaningful ceremony and ritual, and all of those threshold moments that happen in those 4 weeks, which can be a nightmare, but also have the potential to be transformative and profound. So, yeah.
So no, that's wonderful. We've got so much to look forward to in this podcast guest. We're going to hear lots of different things about what Isabel's involved in and all your knowledge. It kind of reminds me of my time as a nurse at the hospice. So I was a director in a hospice for 7 years and in the UK. And prior to going there, I'd been a nurse for a long time, and I was always intrigued by the fact that lots of medics and healthcare professionals are very avoidant of talking about death and dying. And you would have imagined in that line of business that wouldn't probably be the case, but it is sometimes. And I always assumed that often it was because people went into those professions to be rescuers and to kind of make people well, and when that wasn't possible, they kind of struggled with the outcome, which would be that this wouldn't be recovery but might instead be death and dying. But I always worked at that end of the lifetime continuum, so I was always working with older people, and therefore I was very familiar with death, and I saw processes that were super helpful for people in the time of preparation, and processes which were more avoidant and unhelpful and didn't get people to a place where they could even have a conversation. So I really like what you were talking about that kind of preparation phase, which I don't really think we give a lot of attention to.
Well, we're so busy trying to keep our people alive, as you say, that we don't dare to think about the possibility of them not staying alive and of their death. And I mean, you know as well as I do that we're not good at talking about death largely in England. It's getting better. I do feel I do feel there's a really positive movement now. Lots of wonderful funeral directors, undertakers, celebrants, death doulas, who are really all advocating for putting the experience of death and dying back in the hands of those people to whom it matters and to who are central to it, rather than taking it off their hands and discreetly kind of dealing with it. However, having said that, of course, we're in this kind of I don't know what I almost we're in this kind of I call it a Philip. At the moment, I'm feeling like it's a kind of Philip Pullman world of great positivity and change and progress, and exactly the opposite, the counter movement, which, you know, in many ways, for me, is exemplified by the rise of direct cremation, which is
yeah, yeah. And I have followed that trend and seen us come to a place where, of course, choice is always helpful, you know, and I'm a great believer in choice, always have been and will be as a nurse and a celebrant. You know, I believe that we should be choosing, and we should be choosing in a really informed way. And that's the key difference for me. It needs to be what I call informed choice. And I think at the moment, what I see is a trend in a direction where people are not fully informed of the choices that that they're making and the potential consequences of those choices, because we don't talk as openly about it as we should.
Yeah. And I mean, it's such a rich conversation, isn't it? There are so many different areas to kind of to explore. And again, with the liminal time workshop, that's really shown up by the fact there are these 13 steps. Each one opens up to a whole series of conversations, and at the end of the day, an 8-hour day, 10 till 6, we've barely scratched the surface. But what we have done is created a room of people who, they're just small groups, kind of up to 8, but of people who now can ask questions and have the permission. And I think that's a big thing, isn't it? That we've kind of grown up not feeling like we have permission to ask the questions. It's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. We can see it's wrong, we can feel it's wrong, but we don't feel that we're allowed, because it's death. We have to behave in a certain way, and we can't rock the boat, and we can't upset people, and we can't be seen to be being insensitive by asking direct questions. So there's a whole kind of enabling of a lack of intelligence and honesty, in a sense, of just being able to say, well, that doesn't feel right. What are my options?
Yeah. And I have been alongside conversations as a nurse many times where I've just felt what I've always called cultural awkwardness, which is layered on top of all this kind of let's not go there around that particular subject matter, is even just a kind of awkwardness to begin any conversations which feel deeply personal. And that's really fascinating to me as well, because you know, what I see sometimes is the dying person wants to have these conversations. And I even have had a lady who wouldn't say to me, this is an uphill battle, Tina. I'm struggling to even open up this conversation with my husband, with my mum. You know, my teenagers, she said, they're probably the easiest of the lot, funnily enough.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And again, it's interesting because often, so the first step of the liminal time 13-step process is conversations before death. And one of the big things that we kind of conclude is that we can think, well, I'm not going to talk about that because that will upset them. But it's much more about it upsetting us. And we have to be really clear with ourselves about what our blocks are to having conversations, which can even be about practicalities. But in this topic, even practicalities are deeply emotional. They're deeply loaded questions. So and it still is kind of crazy that that people have that resistance, because it's almost like asking somebody about a question about their death means telling them that they're going to die, which we shouldn't do. And it's quite extraordinary. I mean, I kind of feel that in myself. I won't have this conversation because we're then going to bring to the table that you might actually die, that I might actually die, that we might actually be mortal, and that's really bad manners.
Yeah.
It's
I know, and it's so strong, that protective thing, isn't it? But it's almost like our strength is our weakness. Of the fact we want to protect sometimes puts us in places where we don't have conversations we that would make everyone feel better.
Because it's a misguided protection, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not protecting at all. It's making it much worse and much more likely there's going to be a crisis much more likely they're going to be bad decisions, expensive decisions, and choices that are going to hurt in the long run.
And sometimes information can take our fear away, can't it? Because,
Definitely.
Catherine Mannix's book, With the End in Mind, I'm always quoting her because I feel that's such a helpful text if you're in the healthcare professions. For our listeners, Catherine is consultant doctor specializing in death and dying, and she has written a book about her own experiences and the things she's observed, and there's a bit of it that is written in a way of her surprise and her discomfort when she sees a fellow consultant telling a lady what the dying process will be like, what the actual final feelings might be, what will physiologically happen to her body, etc., and how that just felt wrong footing for Catherine. And I've heard her talk about this, and yet, of course, she's completely changed her mind on all of that. But she was saying, like, it was just the first time I'd ever seen that happen.
It's just, again, for the listeners, that particular passage is a great YouTube. You can get it on YouTube, and it's just like a 13-minute snap of her talking about that whole experience, and it really is worth listening to and watching, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I'll certainly put a link in for our listeners, because I think opening up to this, sometimes it's more frightening not to know and to imagine all the myriad of things than to actually know and understand the real things.
And so much of it we glean from terrible Hollywood films and Netflix series. How death is done in drama is just bound to make you feel terrified.
Yes. It's either terrifying or completely unrealistic, because we're sitting there in a flannelette nightie looking absolutely gorgeous. We say our last few words and then we just close our eyes.
With one tear falling down our cheek.
Yes, exactly. and
if only, eh?
Exactly. And many of our listeners who've, recently experienced a death or are here listening to the podcast for that sort of reason will absolutely know that that's not quite how things are.
Well, the beauty is different, because obviously it can be beautiful, and there are moments of beauty even when it's not beautiful.
Exactly.
It's a very different type of beauty from that.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, actually. So the Good Funeral Guide, what's its aim, Isabel? How did it come about, and what does it aim to do for us all?
So the Good Funeral Guide came about because of a wonderful maverick man called Charles Cowling, who was a celebrant, and really, he was kind of the archetype of the Emperor's New Clothes, the little boy in the crowd going, he's got no clothes on. So he was, in a way, the first person to say, why is the funeral industry working like that? Why are they making these decisions? Why are they charging these prices? On and on and on and on. So he was quite politically minded, passionate, really good writer. And the Good Funeral Guide was born from his recognition that there was nobody advocating for the consumer within the funeral industry. Industry is a difficult world, but I'm going to call it that for now, just for the sake of argument. Really, it's not a great word, but there we go. So it then developed with his musings as a celebrant, and really recognizing the importance of ceremony and true ritual rather than tick box ceremony and ritual, and picking up all kinds of things and following the natural burial movement, looking at different ways of burial or cremation, and starting to unpick even the kind of the eco credentials of those things way before anybody else was having those conversations. And really, really going for what I would say is the progressive death movement, the progressive death attitude of it being a conversation and a to and fro, and what, in a way, that a celebrant has done their job when they're no longer needed. They're there to serve, not to be the main attraction, which in a way was kind of the old way of doing it. Somebody with a lovely voice and charisma stands up and kind of says it all. That sounds rude, but I don't mean it like that. But I think it's very interesting.
No, I completely understand what you're saying. And I think celebrant practice is very varied. And our listeners might have had all sorts of different experiences of a celebrant-led event. But often the celebrant is quite invisible, because what they've done is they have created in the background a place for the family to do what they need to do on the day. And the family might just want a supportive hand on their back as they go through that process and as they go through the ceremony on the day. And they
Yeah.
may or may not want the celebrant to say some words, and that will all be their personal choice.
Yeah.
And I love the word co-production, because I think when I work as a celebrant, I'm going into a family to serve, and I am helping them clarify what it is they want from that occasion. Sometimes working, and I do enjoy the working with the dying as well, so they can be part of the process of planning. But I agree with you completely, and I think modern celebrancy is absolutely about being whatever you're needed to be in that moment, and it's not always up front and center talking.
Yeah, that's right. And again, it almost goes back to that word permission, of supporting people to have permission to say what they want to say, to make the kind of ceremony that is meaningful to them and to their person.
Yeah.
It's not, and really discouraging them from a kind of, oh well, you know, what do people normally do? It's what do you want to do? What's right for you? What feels right for you? And do you know what? We can laugh, we can tell jokes, we can.
Yeah. We don't need to have music. If you don't want to have music, we can do whatever.
Things.
Yeah. So
to go back to the Good Funeral Guide, it then got to a period where Charles wanted to step back from it, and fortunately Fran Hall stepped forward into it and took over from Charles. And Fran is just uniquely placed in funeral world to really hold that space well. And fairly quickly she got me and Jane Morgan, who's a celebrant, on board to support her. So it's the three of us who run it. And essentially it's a not-for-profit organisation, mostly expressed by a website, which is there to empower people and inform people, and to help them feel in control of the choices when they're trying to sort out a funeral. So the pages are just packed full of information about how to have a funeral, how to appoint people that feel right. Questions. There are 2 downloads which I love. I'm still kind of impressed by how direct they are. And one is questions to ask a funeral director. You know, all which unlocks all kinds of things that we don't really feel we have autonomy over. So, you know, simple things like who owns your company? Will there just be one person with us from the start to the end? Will you attend the actual funeral ceremony? Will we be allowed to carry our person? Will we be allowed to visit our person? How many times can we visit our person? Will our person be embalmed? All these kinds of questions that give people ownership of a whole period of time that they didn't have ownership of before. So that's a really great document. And then the other one is questions to ask a direct cremation provider.
Very good. Isabel, I'd like to go back to that topic of direct cremations that we mentioned earlier, because my recent knowledge about this is that it is a growing trend, and in 2023 it was 20% of all funerals, which is quite a lot actually for that to be direct cremation.
Yeah, it's seen extraordinary growth. I mean, we should probably for your listeners explain what direct cremation is, before we then start to unpick what I think about it and what we think about it. So direct cremation refers. When I first started doing the work that we're doing with the Good Funeral Guide into direct cremation, I had an across the board feeling that it was a terrible thing, right? So I don't think that now, but I think it's really, really fundamentally important that people understand what the different offerings of direct cremation are. So, but essentially, direct cremation is cremation of the body without a funeral attached. So in the crudest sense, or in the cleanest sense, it is that the body is taken from the home or from the hospital or wherever, and stored and then cremated, and the ashes are returned to the person, and there is no funeral. With online direct cremation, there is no attending the body, there's no visiting the body, there's no dressing or washing or any of those other things that you might have the desire to and opportunity to do with a good funeral director. It is, and I'm going to be pretty blunt about this. It is body disposal, and this is one of our biggest bugbears with what's going on in the world of online direct cremation, because they are selling it as a funeral, and it is not a funeral. Even now, when I go to one of the online companies, I'm looking at their website, and it's absolutely conscious manipulation of language. So they compare it to a funeral. They say it's so much cheaper than a funeral, but not the fuss of a funeral. Make your funeral plan with us. Have a funeral with us, and then you go into the body of it, and it's all about the cremation. There is no funeral attached to it whatsoever, and this is one of the things that I absolutely. I think it's. Well, yeah, you can tell. I really think it's terrible malpractice.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very misleading. I mean, a friend of mine recently had an ankle injury, was at home in the daytime and was watching a lot of daytime TV. And she said to me, she's not in our world at all. She does something completely different. And she said, God, Tina is a celebrant. What do you think about these adverts that come on all the time? She said, I felt exhausted by the adverts. She said, nearly every, she said, I can't tell you how many there were.
No.
It was all targeted at what I came away thinking, well, I'm obviously a burden to my family because a funeral is going to cost them money. This is going to be cheaper, trouble-free for my family, but it is a funeral. Is it a funeral? And I said, no, it isn't a funeral. Not in that way that a national company will come and collect you and take you. That will be the last time your family see you until your ashes arrive back at their home. I said that's the truth of it. Although there are other ways of doing it with a local funeral director, if you want a more affordable package with more things happening, you can do that more locally. And I would always talk to my local team if I wanted something of that nature. But I said, I think what people don't understand is the distance involved and the fact their family will have no access to them, and there isn't a service.
Yeah, I mean that's right, and there's a number of reasons I think why this is succeeding as a thing, and one of those is that people don't understand the value of a good funeral, and that's the reason behind that is kind of multifaceted. One of them is the model now in which we have funerals in crematoriums with slot, the awful language behind it, slots. You get a slot. Do you want a single slot or do you want a double slot? And you're in a situation in an environment that wasn't built for true ceremony and for true ritual. So you're there with people in front of you, people behind you, the whole conveyor belt feeling. And it's not a place where naturally people can relax and then really feel what they need to feel in order for a true ritual, a true farewell, a true celebration to take place. So what a majority of those daytime viewers have experienced when they've gone to a funeral is something that they would rather not actually go to because it's a painful, unpleasant experience that bears very little relevance to the person who they love who's died. Of course, that's not always the case. I really want to drive home that is not always the case. It's just that is often the case, and people just can't wait for it to be over so they can go and have a pint afterwards. So we at the Good Funeral Guide recognise that one of our jobs is to really, really educate people in what can be possible from a good funeral and why a good funeral is so important for the grieving process. And one of the things that we're doing a lot of work around direct cremation, around understanding what it is, understanding what the different offerings are, understanding where we think there's malpractice, and we're in conversation with the Ministry of Justice about it. And we've designed a questionnaire, which I would absolutely love your readers to fill in if they've had any experience whatsoever with direct cremation, because we can come with a bunch of assumptions and a bunch of outrage, but we need to know what's really happening on the ground. And in many cases, it can work and does work. But there's to be blunt. In many ways, there's a mental health crisis waiting down the line for those people who had direct cremation, for the people they love, and didn't realise that they then were hugely missing out because they didn't have the ceremony, the opportunity to say goodbye, which is necessary and is a healing process.
And not all, sorry, Isabel, not all And I sometimes say this to my clients, and we not, I was talking recently to a lady whose funeral I've just officiated with the family, and we planned some of it with her herself before she died. And she was just saying about the things she did and didn't want. And I laughingly said to her, because we had a good relationship, well, it's not all about you. Isn't it? I said, no, it's not.
Yes.
I said, a lot of it is obviously about you and your life and your contribution and everything we want to celebrate about you. I said, but some of it's about leaving a little bit of space in the arrangements for your family to express something, anything that they might want to express. I said, so we were laughing about that. And I think that is the kind of dilemma around direct cremation. And I have certainly had two examples in my own practice in the last year. One was a family I've recently done an interment for around a graveside, where we all told stories about their mum, and she arranged a direct cremation. They weren't aware of it at all. They were not aware of it at all. And the company came for her. They, in their momentary distress, in the moment they found themselves, they have since described themselves as feeling guilty for letting her go with this company. And then the next time they knew anything about it, there was a phone call to say there will be ashes delivered. And they had no ceremony at that point in time. So 6 months later, they're all feeling quite bereft, was the language, and they said, we need to do something. And I said, well, why don't you make a bit of a thing of the day that you're going to inter the ashes and make that your ceremonial moment? And what they created was very beautiful, actually.
Great. Beautiful. But they're lucky to have you there to advise them.
But I was so I found it upsetting to see their distress, actually, at feeling helpless in the moment when direct cremation happened and they had no knowledge of it. And so I often say to people, and if you're listening, listeners, and you've been kind of toying with the idea of direct cremation for yourself, then please do go and find out about it in detail, and also talk to your family or your friends, or let people know that this is something that you are considering, because they will want to understand why you think that needs to be your choice.
Yeah, so do go on to the Good Funeral Guide, because that's got a really useful section on direct cremation, and also explains that basically whatever you choose is fine. That's, if it's right for you, it's right for you. But the important thing is to make an informed choice, so you really understand what it is that you're choosing. And the issue, as I've already explained, that we have with a lot of the online companies is that they're not supporting you to make a clear choice. They're doing quite the opposite. They're using language in a manipulative, unclear way, so it can become a bit of a minefield to actually work out what you're getting. Yeah, as well as understanding what it is that you're not having if you have a direct cremation and don't have a ceremony. So one of the distinct, again, we've been working with funeral directors and celebrants and talking about the whole rise of direct cremation, and what we're uncovering, I guess, is that direct cremation can work well when it's something that you work in conjunction with a good funeral director with. So in that situation, it's still a cheaper option, because the unattended cremation is happening in the early morning, for instance, which is cheaper at the crematorium. But you still get the advantage of knowing where your person is, and knowing that you can visit them, and knowing that you can do all of those things in terms of care of your person. And there's relationship to it. And then a good funeral director would advise you to have a ceremony either just before or just after, but absolutely to hold that space where you can have your farewell. So in that way, there's nothing lost, really, that I can see.
I would agree, and some of the leaning into the green credentials and what people want to do around the planet. You can certainly have something in the favourite place, like let's just choose a rugby club, and then you can have the person leave You all wave goodbye after a ceremony. You remain there and you have your gathering afterwards, and nobody's driving hither and thither and all of that. And then in the meantime, a direct cremation can happen in the background. So all of that is entirely possible. And the other thing that I think is about the mental well-being of people who've had a loss. And I had somebody come and chat to me after a ceremony I'd done on a tramway, on Seaton Tramway, which is close to us. We did a ceremony on the tram.
Great.
And at the end, and it was one of the most beautiful ceremonies I've been able to participate in. Afterwards, somebody said to me as they were leaving, could she talk to me? And we stood outside and she was very tearful, and her loss had been during the pandemic and there had been no space for anything. And here she was 3 to 4 years later saying, I just cannot get beyond the fact that we didn't have a funeral. And can we do anything now? And I'm like, of course you can do something now.
Yeah, that's right. Of course you can.
Yeah.
But so extraordinary to me, this exponential rise in direct cremation after we've gone through what we went through with the pandemic, and after we really understood what it was like not to be able to attend a funeral. And that, it's kind of exacerbated or personified by that incredible picture of the Queen at Philip's funeral, there all on her own with no one around her. We really understood the power of community, the power of a collective farewell, the need to do that, to go through that tradition. And yet, so how, having understood how agonizing it was not to have that, are we now opting for it? It's a question I can't quite answer unless we're all suffering from Stockholm syndrome of some sort.
I know. And if you think about the bookends of life, when a child comes into this life, there is a welcome of some description. Even if the family just gather in a small way, or there might be a christening or some religious way of welcoming. And some people might have a naming ceremony if they don't have a strong faith. But, there's usually some form of something to say hello and welcome to a new being.
Yeah.
So I struggle myself with the idea of why are we not having the bookend of that, which is that goodbye, which takes some form, whatever is affordable and in keeping with what everybody would wish to do.
Yeah. Again, I think it speaks to the taboos around death, to not understanding the function and the purpose of a good funeral, and financially to the money. Again, the online direct cremation providers are pulling a manipulative trick, in my opinion, because they're not comparing like with like. So they're comparing the cost of a direct cremation with the cost of a funeral, and that's comparing apples with pears. They're two different things. So that's bad practice. But again, funeral directors have something to answer there. The prices have gone up exponentially. There are cheaper ways of doing it. All the things you're talking about of having a ceremony elsewhere, having them in rugby clubs or in parks or pubs or museums.
Yeah, your house even.
Your house. Yeah. And I love that. I love the idea of having it in your house or your garden or whatever.
Yeah.
Those are all much, much, much cheaper options. And you don't have to have the vehicles and you don't have to have the expensive coffins and all of these things. It's an act of creativity, and that's exciting that we can reclaim death and be creative. You had that lovely podcast with Willow Coffin. Oh my goodness, it was lovely to hear her talk. And again about the human connection and the creativity and the love that goes into that. It's wonderful. And there's so many ways.
And if you let somebody be part of that, the passing on to another place, or however you see that part of what will happen at the end for you, it eases for everybody. And definitely as a nurse, being around people as they were dying, the family being able to be present, to be able to be reading a book or playing some music or mopping a brow or doing it, just in the background, making scrambled eggs. It doesn't matter. It's the sense of being with others at the end. And then beyond that final moment of breath, then yes, you want
and it's about
to be held.
Because it's about affirming the new reality. And
Mm.
again, something I look at in the liminal time workshop, to spend time with a person after they've died, not to jump onto the phone and make it a medical emergency, but to spend time with your person who's
Mm.
died gives you time physically, emotionally, mentally to catch up with the new reality of what's happened, which is really important. You get so many stories of this kind of dissonance of people don't really get that the person's died because they weren't told for ages, or they didn't see the dead body, or there wasn't a funeral. And that whole process of that period of time, which I call liminal time between the death and the ceremony, is a really profound time of adapting to a new reality, to the death of your person. And the funeral, designing the funeral and doing the funeral is such an important part of witnessing, bearing witness to this new reality. And not just that, but transforming relationship. So transforming a relationship from being with someone you love who's alive to being with someone who you still love who's died. And
Yeah.
that, to do that collectively, to recognize that we've lost this beloved person and now we all have to shift. Everything shifts, relationships shift, our relationship to ourselves shifts.
Yeah.
And it's complex.
And in that community of sharing about a person, I often
Mm,
discover that
mm,
the family didn't know some facets of that person. So if I was to pop off tomorrow, there's
mm,
my work me, there's my
mm,
book club and friendship me, there's my mum and family me, wife
mm,
me.
mm,
There's all
mm,
sorts of different iterations of me.
mm, mm,
And they hopefully there'll be a collective conversation about me afterwards. And people will
mm,
discover things from each other about me. And
which is
that will,
lovely.
yeah, and that will complete the jigsaw of me.
Yeah,
And if they don't get to gather, that won't
yeah,
happen.
that's right. That's right.
And
And I,
that's one of the big missing elements for me in
yeah,
dealing with loss and moving forward after death.
yeah. Because the community of family and friends is still the community of family and friends of the person who's died. That's still an active thing. And I kind of love those stories where you hear of, well, certainly like of children, for instance, learning something new about their parent after the
Mm,
parent's death. And it's like, it's the ongoing, the continuing bonds, the ongoing relationship of you still are in relationship with this person. It's changed. And
yeah,
the community of that person can give you, as you say, all the different facets and colours and
mm,
shades and stories that you shouldn't hear about the
yes,
person.
that's right.
It's wonderful.
It is
Mm,
wonderful. So people can do some things then, can't they? I mean, on a personal preparing level, I would probably advocate, as you do, is about finding your website, which we'll put in the show notes for people, make a really informed decision.
mm.
Um, if you've experienced a direct cremation and you'd like to give some feedback to the surveying that you're doing, we'll certainly put that link as well.
And that's good
Um,
or bad and indifferent, everything in
yeah,
between.
you
You
you know
really want
your
to capture the
real
whole lot. Yeah,
yeah, your real lived experience.
yeah, yeah,
Isabel and the
that's it.
team are really genuinely interested to know.
Yes,
Um,
that's it.
and anything else you'd like to mention?
It is about having those conversations. So the funeral plan, as well, they call them funeral plans, are being really heavily pushed by online companies. And again, it goes back to that question of who is the funeral actually for. So I think if you have any inkling that your parents or other people are taking out a direct cremation funeral plan, have the courage to gently start that conversation. Because the funeral industry isn't regulated, but they're looking at regulation now, one of the things that might happen is that people's wishes become regulated and that you have to obey them, as it were. And I predict a time when people will understand actually that having no ceremony isn't a great idea. So then to have to follow wishes that aren't necessarily going to be right for the people who are left behind, it is going to be a difficult thing. So gently to start those conversations about what might be what might be, yeah, what might be a better choice, or
Mm,
why is that choice? Because like you said of your friend watching daytime TV and they came away feeling like, oh God, I'm just going to be a hassle for my family and it's all going to be expensive, how terrible. That you want to know that your parents aren't feeling like that. You want to know that they feel confident and loved and that you want the best for them, and those conversations are really important to have anyway,
Yeah.
irrespective of direct cremation. Those are really important conversations to have.
Yeah. And I have a really clear memory when I think about direct cremations of an actual cremation that I attended. And I was a nurse in a community hospital, and one of our long-standing residents in the time when people did used to spend a long time in those kind of facilities died. And I was going to her funeral to represent the hospital and the team who'd looked after her for many years. And on the morning of the funeral, I left my home and I just had a rose bush. And honestly, it was a very fleeting thought, Isabel. I thought, I'll just pick some roses, and got to the crematorium, and there was me and the funeral director and the vicar who said a few words, because this lady didn't have any family, and she had had an arranged funeral by the county council, or the government sort of cheaper funeral,
estate funeral,
estate funeral, and my flowers were the only ones. And I sat there, and it was very brief what was said, and then he said, does anyone want to say anything? And I just felt I really wanted to say something about her, because she had a character and a personality, and I got to know a bit about her. And she had been an engineer on Lancashire bombers as a young woman, and I just wanted to put some of this out loud into the world, really.
Lovely.
I left that room thinking, but she had such value, and that at least there was an event, I guess, and that we all have value, and we all deserve that moment of that value being felt for the life that we've lived.
That's right. And of our stories being told and our stories being shared.
Yeah. And then I compare that to the direct cremation, and that's where my discomfort comes from.
Yeah. And you never know who's listening, who might be touched in ways you can't imagine from a story that's been told or a moment that's been shared. It's immeasurable. You can't count the value of a good ceremony. It does so much. It's a complex thing that we overlook. We don't understand the true value of, and it can be super simple as well. It doesn't have to be bells and whistles. It can be really simple as long as it's genuine.
Yeah, I agree. Authentic, and based on the person. Yeah.
Isabel. One of the really annoying things that gets me, that I'm just going to finish, as a very big fan of David Bowie, in the early days, the big kind of sales pitch of direct cremation was, it's what David Bowie had. So don't you want to have what David Bowie had? He did not have a direct cremation. He had a hugely personal and kind of prolonged ritual abroad, a Buddhist ritual with multiple layers. So again, it's just that really real frustration with the manipulation of us, of people who are vulnerable, who want to do the right thing by our person, so yes, go out, find out the facts, go to our website, have a good look, have a good think, and most of all, have a good talk.
Excellent advice, Isabel. It's been an absolute joy having you on, talking about all of this. We'll pop all those links in for everyone. And at the bottom of the show notes, there's always we'd be happy to hear from you tab. So if you did have additional questions, or you ever wanted to pop anything in there, I can always pick that up with Isabel at a later date. Perfect. Thank you so much. You have been listening to Good Goobyes with Tina.
Thank you so much, Tina and Isabel Russo. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Good Goobyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment and share. Drop any questions on our social media, on Instagram, or in the text option in the show notes.
Si and I are qualified professionals, but we always advise our clients to seek any additional support from medical practitioners if they need to. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay well and be kind to one another.